All right, hey everyone. Welcome to the newest episode of the Newton podcast. In this episode, I'm joined by Vishal, who's the lead product manager at Magic Labs, the core developer of Newton Protocol. And we're going to talk about how a single transaction is broken down as it travels through Newton's authorization stack. Vishal is going to speak about how the architecture is planned, how it works, and how the protocol is designed at each layer. So can we start off, Vishal? I don't know. Could you give us a brief intro about who you are and what you're doing with Newton?
Yeah, I'm the lead product manager here at Magic Labs. I've been working at the company for a few years now and work across everything related to the developer experience, to the core protocol, the whole gamut of it. And it's been super fun over the last couple of years.
Great. So I'm going to start off just talking about what authorization means to you on chain. When you first learned about this problem, what was interesting about it, and what do people you think get wrong about what that really means?
Yeah, I think that the part that's most fascinating to me is that when you think about a transaction, settling a transaction between two parties is really just one part of it. There's actually a whole lot that goes behind the scenes before a transaction can even go through. So if you think about the Web 2 world, there's a lot of different parties that need to be involved in the loop in order to verify things like compliance, fraud, security, etc. And we kind of lack that in the crypto world. And so I think what people miss is that in order to actually make crypto and blockchain technology more universally adopted, settlement is just one part of it. We really need to bring in all the other components of a transaction in order to really scale this technology up.
So how does it work today? If I just wanted to have an intent to do something and a transaction being settled, what is the status quo today?
What you mean without Newton, right?
Right.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to do that today, you'd have to find a way in your smart contract to, encode all that logic and bring in the relevant data providers. And often it's super clunky and just not a great developer experience. Working in Solidity can be tricky depending on your smart contract platform. Upgrading things are really painful. The standards aren't necessarily established yet, and so it's just not a great developer experience and difficult to maintain and scale on.
Okay. So you mentioned a lot of difficulties in trying to do this, without Newton. So what is special about Newton with how it expresses this policy as code? So can you talk? I've heard that, it uses Rego. We've mentioned that. And instead of just writing rules directly in the smart contract, like you just mentioned as a status quo. So what is the benefit of Newton expressing policies in Rego instead of just writing the rules into the smart contract itself?
Yeah, great question. So you can think about traditional blockchains like the EVM ecosystem as being, very focused on being general computing infrastructure. Newton is really designed from the ground up to be way more focused on policies and authorization. So let's talk about Rego, which is one of the things that you'd mentioned. Rego is a language that is used to write policies. And a couple great things about it. One is it's an industry standard, even going beyond blockchain. This is something that IT teams use in traditional enterprises. And it's just number two, a super flexible and easy to use language compared to using Solidity. And so with Rego, you can actually write very expressive policies that help you enforce all sorts of transactions. And Newton is built from the ground up to leverage this component.
All right. Can you give us an example, like let's say in the vault space generally? If I wanted a policy to be evaluated by a curator, how does that work today with Newton?
Yes, you're interested like a technical, a little bit more layer deeper, like how does Vault leverage Newton to enforce policies?
I guess just in the vault, yeah, in both. If you could set the stage a bit about how Newton can work with vaults, maybe we can start there and then talk about how you describe the policies being written in Rego and how does that work for, let's say, a curator?
Yeah, so as we all know, Vaults has been growing in interest and adoption over the last couple of years, attracting institutional allocators and retail alike. And over time, we've started to see the need for guardrails in order to better protect allocators, but they're a little limited today. So let's take an example. A lot of smart contracts will encode various strategies, protocols, or different things that a curator is allowed to do. But these itself have limitations. And so there's a handful of use cases where Newton can be quite helpful in this area. And those are security, compliance, market risk, those types of things. And so the reason that Newton is actually quite beneficial here is for a couple reasons. The big one is that you can leverage off-chain data in order to enforce on-chain policies. So you can look at historical APY trends for a particular vault, or you can look at an off-chain risk score that a particular vendor might leverage. You can look at market volatility over the last 24 hours. And so by leveraging all of these off-chain signals, you can actually provide a pretty comprehensive picture of what strategies are valid and are very reasonable versus ones that might be a little bit more risky. And in turn, what this does is it makes using vaults a lot more palatable for the allocators. And I believe it'll help make this technology and this use case even more widely used in the near future.
You mentioned that there's the ability to bring in off-chain data into policy enforcement on-chain. How does Newton do that?
Yeah, so the way that Newton works is Newton is a protocol that enforces these policies. And so each operator in this protocol will get a proposal for a transaction and a policy that it should be evaluated against. And so each of those operators will evaluate that policy, which includes logic for calling a third-party data providers. For example, we work with vaults.fyi, we work with WebAssy as well. And so you can pull, each of these operators can pull all that off-chain data at the time of evaluating a policy. And once it determines that the policy is compliant, aka meaning that it has actually passed the policy checks, it broadcasts that back out to the entire network saying, okay, for this particular transaction against this particular policy, it is compliant and allowed to go through.
Yeah. A really important part of this stack is around verifiability and trust. And you just mentioned how Newton's making these decisions about whether certain rules are being satisfied. How do these policies and policy decisions actually get made? What is the trust model behind Newton?
Yeah, so the main thing is that it's a decentralized network of operators that are evaluating these policies that is backed by the Newton network or secured by the Newton network. And so what that means is anyone using the Newton protocol doesn't need to trust any individual operator, as there are a consensus mechanisms to ensure that an operator is not being malicious or being insincere. And as a result, anyone that's leveraging the network can have trust or can have confidence that the network is doing its best to enforce the policies. And I think the component of this that really makes this shine is the Newton Explorer. So anybody can actually go in and look at the Newton Explorer, which is a record of every single task. A task is just a proposed intent or transaction along with a particular policy. And so anybody can go and look at the record of tasks and get a view of what has been evaluated. And so, this isn't just, a policy engine and kind of an off-chain opaque system. This is a fully decentralized, transparent policy engine that anybody can go and verify with the Newton Explorer.
Let's say I was a someone in the vault space, an allocator, a curator. How do I get started using Newton?
Yeah, I mean the best way to get started with Newton is there's a few different mechanisms that we offer. The easiest way is to leverage the Newton SDK. We also have a new Vaults SDK that makes it really easy for you to actually integrate these policies directly into your smart contract. We also have a list of policies that we've already partnered with various data providers to just make it really easy for you to get started. So you can go into the Newton dashboard today and get access to these policies. We call them the policy stack, meaning you can kind of mix and match the various different components that you need for your system. You can even edit it and tweak it as you see it. But yeah, overall, it's pretty easy to get started today with our SDKs as well as with our policy packs and our developer dashboard.
Can I bring any kind of off-chain data to a Newton policy?
Yeah, you can. Like I mentioned, there are some out-of-the-box policies that make it really easy for you to get started. But if those don't fit what you need and you want to bring in your own data source, you could totally do that yourself. You can write your own policy. The actual third-party API calls get compiled down into a WASM binary WebAssembly, and so it's very easy to integrate any third-party source directly into your policy.
I've seen a lot about Newton and how it uses its attestations. Can you explain a bit about how the attestations are created and what their role is in enforcement?
For sure. So as I mentioned earlier, Newton is a network of decentralized operators that evaluate these policies. So once a policy is actually evaluated to compliant or non-compliant, let's say compliant in this case, it broadcasts out a proof, a cryptographic proof that says for this particular intent against this particular policy, it is allowed to go through. That proof is then enforced back in the smart contract wherever the initial intent seeks to be executed. So let's say, for example, a user wants to make a transaction on Base. They want to send money, or they want to, make a curation decision, or they want to send money from point A to point B. That transaction, let's say, should get settled on Base. Before that, it gets validated against the Newton network, and that proof is produced by the Newton network. Then, when the intent is proposed on the Base chain, the proof is sent along with that transaction, and it is verified against the Newton library. There's a little snippet that you can include in any of your smart contract code, which then validates that proof and acts as the final gate for whether the transaction should go through or not on the destination chain of your choice.
Got it. So do I have it right that if I want to use Newton, I rely on, I give it my rules. I give it the data sources I want these rules to point to. Newton creates a attestation that is kind of like a green light or a red light about whether a policy has been satisfied. And that is what enables a transaction to actually settle on chain.
That's exactly right. The green light or red light is what Newton communicates, and then that green light or red light is then enforced in the destination blockchain.
And does this work across multiple different kinds of chains? I heard you mentioned Base.
Yeah, for sure. So we support Ethereum and Base at the moment. More chains are coming out.
Got it. Right now, there's a lot of headlines with regulatory developments happening in crypto and people starting to take compliance more seriously as these rules are being developed across the world. As more of this infrastructure becomes focused on compliance, where do you think the next hard problems are for protocols to wrangle with to meet the demands of institutions?
Yeah, I think the big ones that I'm hearing about are, general AML compliance, as well as, KYC and complying with various regulations in the US and internationally. There are ways that you can start to attempt to filter out bad actors or the wrong users, kind of in the browser or at the Web 2 layer. But what Newton does really well is it enforces it on chain in a smart contract. So as a developer, you can confidently say, to anybody that you're complying with the regulations, and furthermore provide an audit trail via the Newton Explorer to clearly and transparently communicate your posture.
Yeah. Yeah, I know there's other solutions out there like the T-Rex protocol with ERC, I think it's like 3643, if I have it right, that people can define these rules in the smart contract itself, like in the token standard. Why is that alternative, in your view, better or worse than what Newton can provide with his modular approach?
Yeah, I think the great thing about Newton is a couple things. One is, again, the policy engine is written in Rego. It's way more developer friendly and easier to integrate, very flexible. And then, it lives outside of the destination chain. So if you have your policy written, for one chain, you can pretty easily switch it over to another destination chain as you see fit. Again, Newton was built from the ground up to solve this authorization problem. And so it's less opinionated upon what destination chain you want to use. So in that sense, I think it's the best approach if you want to do anything related to policies and enforcement of those policies.
What's the thing that's exciting you the most about what the team is building now?
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, it's going from building a technology platform to solving like real world problems. Again, I'm super passionate about the vault space and bringing decentralized finance to the masses. And beyond just the core settlement technology or the logic of moving money, I really do believe it's that final layer of trust, verifiability, and transparency that's going to get this technology over the line to really be adopted by institutions and the masses.
So, Vishal, I heard you mention that Newton uses Rego as a policy language for its protocol. Can you explain what the benefits of Rego are, and just generally for anyone who hasn't heard of that before, what is it?
Yeah, so Rego is actually it's a standard language that's used across enterprises, even outside of the Web3 or crypto world. It's used for various different compliance and IT policies. And so that's one component, is that it's quite standard. There's a lot of tooling and documentation available for it already. And then two is, I think it's just way more flexible and easier to work with compared to doing this type of thing in any sort of other blockchain language like Solidity or otherwise. So standard, lots of tooling and documentation available, and two, just a lot more easier to work with and flexible from a developer experience standpoint.
Vishal, I saw an announcement recently from Magic Labs around the Vaults SDK product release. Could you talk about why Newton is well positioned to solve the problems in authorization and vaults today?
For sure. Yeah. I mean, fundamentally, Newton solves the problem of transparency and verifiability, making sure that you can see that a transaction was executed for the right reason and that it was authorized against various different criteria. I think fundamentally, faults is a very fascinating space because it's handling a high volume of money. The use case handles a high volume of money that demands this level of trust and verifiability. You want to have confidence as a depositor that your money is being managed in a thoughtful and a smart way, guarding against the right risks, making sure that you're abiding by the right security protocols, making sure that it's compliant, etc. And so I think Newton is really actually, it really solves this problem directly, being that authorization layer that handles all those types of problems.
Okay, well, that's very informative and enlightening. Thank you, Vishal, for carving time out of your very busy day, building Newton to help educate us and talk about what you're working on.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Love chatting about this at any time.